If you checked out every book from every library in the world and scanned them, and then downloaded every single web page on the internet, you could delete anything that appears more than once and take out any errors. And you could feed what's left into a computer program. This program would read all that information, breaking it down into smaller pieces like letters and words. Next, it builds a map of these pieces, making billions of connections between them to see which ones appear together most often. By measuring the strength of these connections, it would learn how human language works. So, when you give it the first word in a sentence, it could guess what should come next. Each time it got a word wrong, it would be corrected millions and millions of times. And when it was good enough at guessing the next word, you could ask it to write its own texts, correcting it every time it made a mistake until it finally gave you words that sounded just like a human. Place over 3,000 people in a single line to form the base. Then stack another slightly smaller layer on top, and if you repeat this step more than 3,000 times, you would have a stable triangle made from over 5.5 million people, and the person on top would be just tall enough to touch the Burj Khalifa's roof. But the wind up there can be extremely strong, meaning the triangle probably wouldn't last very long. He pointed the revolver straight at the puppy, aiming right at the dog's head. You see, he had tried to give them away, but he couldn't find anyone to take them. Now, one was tucked into his arm, while the other squirmed in his left hand. But as the puppy tried to escape, its paw slipped onto the trigger. The gun fired instantly, shooting him through the wrist. He survived, but was charged with animal cruelty after he confessed to the police. And the puppy that shot him was named Trigger and adopted by a family. If you start in the middle square and your opponent chooses a corner, you'll both keep trying to block each other's moves, which will always end in a draw. But if they choose a side square instead, you can make your next move above or below your first mark. And even if your opponent blocks one winning line, you can use the corner square to create a second option. So once they block that line, you can still win the game with your next move. They injected Botox into the camel's lips to plump them up, before making its muscles bigger with hormones and using filler for a relaxed expression. Then the camels were entered into a beauty contest for the chance to win millions of dollars. But the officials got suspicious, and when they used x-rays to check for cheating, they found more than 40 camels with work done, and they were all disqualified. They took a tissue sample from the dog and sent it to a lab where the DNA was taken out. Then they injected it into an empty egg cell, which was placed inside a female dog. You see, the man's dog was from a super rare breed, and now that she was getting old, he knew it would be hard to find a replacement. So he decided to clone her, and when the puppy was born, she looked like an exact copy of his first dog. But even though her personality turned out completely different, the man loved her just the same. Slice the cactus leaf off the plant and grab it with tongs to avoid the spikes. Next, scrape it clean with a knife, cut off the edges and base, then rinse it in water to remove the spikes you missed. Pat it completely dry and coat it in oil and salt, then place it in a pan and press it down to fry. Once it's brown on both sides, put the cactus on a tortilla, add meat, sour cream, and herbs, and enjoy your cactus taco. If you keep peeling away the circumference of a circle into lines and stack them until the circle disappears, the layers will eventually create a triangle with a base as wide as the original circumference and a height as tall as the radius. Now, this is because the area of a triangle is half of the base multiplied by the height. So that becomes 1/2 times the circumference times the radius, showing that the area of the circle matches the area of the triangle. Imagine you have a smoke alarm in your brain, and its only job is to spot danger and sound the alarm. Now, if the sensitivity dial is set normally, it only rings for real smoke. But if the dial is turned up, the alarm is too sensitive, and it goes off for almost anything, causing you to feel danger. And if you panic when this happens and try to escape the feeling, well, you're essentially turning up that sensitivity dial. And this cycle gets stronger and stronger over time. But if you just let it ring and you don't react to it like it's an actual emergency, over time that sensitivity dial will turn back down. The cycle will be broken and your anxiety will subside. She folded the paper crane in her hospital bed, her hand shaking as she added it to the growing pile beside her. You see, 10 years earlier, she had survived the bombing of Hiroshima. But now, the sickness from the radiation was slowly taking over her body. Her friends told her an old legend: if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, the gods grant you a wish. She decided to make the cranes and wish to live. So every day, as she grew weaker, she kept folding. Cranes covered her bedside table, then the windowsill, then the chair next to her. And in just a month, she finished all 1,000, plus 300 more. But her wish didn't come true, and she passed away at just 12 years old. A statue was made in her honor, a girl holding a crane toward the sky. And soon, children around the world began folding paper cranes too, sending them to be placed beneath her statue. Tiny glass beads are attached to the fabric, which celebrities wear as scarves. Now, it looks like a regular accessory, but if someone takes a photo with a flash, the bright light hits the beads. Each one has a reflective coating at the back, which bounces the light straight back at the camera lens. And the scarves shine so bright that the camera changes its exposure to match, while everything around it stays dark. This ruins the photo and keeps the celebrity mostly invisible unless it's altered in Photoshop. The small country of Vietnam won the war against the US. Now, the US had more troops, more firepower, more technology than Vietnam could ever match. So how did they do this? Well, they used their dense jungle as cover, moving through tunnel systems that stretched for miles underground. They set booby traps along paths and ambushed patrols before vanishing back into the jungle. When the Americans bombed from above, the Viet Cong moved deeper into the forest. You see, the US tactics were designed for open war, not an enemy hiding in the jungle. North Vietnam won by fighting smarter, not bigger. The bear stepped into the road as the car approached, and there was no time to stop. It was dead, and the man loaded it into his car for the fur and the meat. But he drove to a steakhouse for dinner and then needed to catch a flight. He couldn't leave the bear in his car, so he thought it would be funny to drag it into Central Park and lay it next to an old bicycle. The next morning, a woman walking her dog found it. Now, police confirmed it had been hit by a car, but the case went cold for years until a journalist confronted him, and RFK called it a prank gone wrong. A rich lawyer died, and in his will, he promised to give away his money to one woman in his city. But there was a catch. She had to have more kids than anyone else. So the women started having babies as fast as possible, and some were pregnant every year of the contest. When the 10 years were up, 4 women had each given birth to 9 babies, meaning they were all tied for the winner. After months of court fights, the money was split between all the women. If Artemis II tried to fly straight to the moon, Earth's gravity would keep pulling it back down. To escape this, the rocket would need massive engines with tons of fuel, which would cost way too much money. So instead, the rocket will launch upwards before tipping horizontally. Earth's gravity pulls it inwards, swinging the rocket in a circular path. And as it builds up speed, it climbs higher and higher, looping around Earth until it can escape its pull. Then, with a last push, it finally flies to the moon. If you drive 10 miles over the speed limit because you're late, you probably think that you're saving time. But at 70 miles per hour, it takes 51 seconds to drive a mile. And if you go 80, it takes 45 seconds, meaning you're only saving 6 seconds per mile. Now, you'll also catch up to slower cars faster, which means you'll tap the brakes more. You'll also switch lanes, and you'll have to be more cautious overall. And these tiny slowdowns add up and can easily wipe out those few seconds you saved almost instantly. If you shoot a handgun straight into stacked rolls of toilet paper, the bullet would shred through the first rolls instantly. But each layer of paper drags against the bullet and slows it down a little more, meaning you would need 16 single-ply rolls, packed tightly together so there are no gaps, to completely stop the bullet. Now, with 2-ply rolls, there's actually less paper per roll, so it takes closer to 24 before the bullet finally loses all its speed. Crack an egg in a tall glass, then sprinkle salt and pepper on top. Next, add a tablespoon of mustard and a splash of vinegar before filling the rest of the glass with oil. Then lower a hand blender all the way to the bottom. Turn it on and slowly pull it up, mixing the ingredients from the bottom to the top. And when you're done, you'll have homemade mayonnaise. They dropped the hamster in front of the snake as food because the snake refused to eat frozen mice. But instead of attacking her, he treated her as a friend, cuddling up to the furry rodent. He even curled up to nap, allowing the hamster to sleep on his back. Eventually, the snake started eating frozen food again, and since they got along so well, the hamster was allowed to stay permanently. He would steal the dog and take it home with him, but this wasn't just a random pet. You see, he did his research beforehand, hanging out in dog parks and looking for emotional owners. You know, the ones who loved their pets as if they were kids. Then he would follow them home, stake out the house, and take their dogs. Soon, the lost dog posters would appear, and when he offered his help, they always agreed money was no object to these people. When he finally staged the reunion, he would live stream it, and it was always a hit. Hundreds of thousands tuned in live, and soon his videos even attracted sponsors. That's because he had a knack for finding the best targets, like Ernie, an elderly veteran with PTSD, and a support dog as his only companion. After stealing his dog, he streamed himself pretending to find him, and teased a dramatic live stream of the reunion when he would return the animal. But when he stepped inside the veteran's house, the dog stopped dead in its tracks and started whining. He shrugged it off with a smile. There were thousands of viewers watching. With a sharp tug, he managed to get the dog moving until he got to the kitchen and found the man on the floor dead. Panicked, he fumbled with the record button, desperate to shut off the stream.
"This wasn't supposed to happen,"
he whispered.
"I just steal them. I give them back. I'm not a killer."
But the stream never actually stopped, and his followers heard everything. Drill 2 holes into a bamboo tube and run a cord through them. Loop it around a piece of wood so it hangs inside. Next, carve 2 notches into the tube and slip the piece into 1 notch. Then bend a bamboo strip into a curve to create the spring. Push it through the other notch into the ground and connect it to the wood so tension holds it in place. Now place bait at the end. When a rat crawls past the wood, it snaps upward, pulling the cord tight around the rat's neck and lifting it off the ground. She hid a camera inside the nursing home room so she could spy on the nurses. You see, her father was bedridden and couldn't speak, and she noticed strange bruises on him. When she checked the footage, she saw a nurse forcing a spoon down his throat and holding a napkin over his mouth and nose. She reported it to the police, and the nurse was arrested. But the nursing home management accused her of illegally filming staff and tried to take away her control over her father's care. Eventually, her father passed away, and she went on to advocate for allowing cameras in nursing homes. He tried to pull out just one pill, but 30 of them stuck to his hand, meaning he swallowed a massive dose of meth. You see, in World War II, soldiers were given these pills for extra energy. And after taking all of them, he started skiing, leading his men away from enemy soldiers. But he had taken so many drugs that he soon lost them all. He skied over 60 miles alone and ended up lost in the wilderness with no supplies. Now, he was still so high that he just kept going day and night, crossing 250 miles on his own, until he finally stepped on a landmine. But despite his injuries, he didn't give up. He stayed awake, waiting for help to come, until a plane finally spotted him and brought him back to safety. Score the hot dog on both sides before throwing it on the griddle. Then grate cheese into a hot dog bun. Next, add the hot dog and another layer of cheese. Pack it down tight before oiling the griddle with butter. Then flip the whole thing cheese side down to fry it. Once the cheese is brown, turn it over, toasting the back lightly, then dip it in ketchup for the perfect grilled cheese hot dog. She watched his face turn black before growing long, pointy ears and a snout. His skin changed into scales, and his eyes turned yellow. And this happened to every person she saw. When she told doctors, they scanned her and found brain damage, which may have disrupted the part that controlled facial recognition and color. So they gave her medication to manage the symptoms, and she could finally live a normal life. Place a pivot here. Now spin the line. The part near the center will move slowly, creating different sized circles to eventually make a shape that sort of looks like a sun. Now add another rotating point. The first pivot pulls the whole line around. The second swings it out wider, and the tip spins the fastest of them all, meaning this single line will trace out something that looks like a flower. Stick the orange in a glass and slice the peel all the way around. Then slide a spoon under the peel to separate it from the fruit. Do the same on the other side before pulling off the top half. Now slowly wiggle the fruit out of the bottom, leaving the white core attached to the peel. Then pour olive oil over it until it's soaked and fill the bowl-shaped peel halfway before lighting the core. As it burns, it'll pull oil up through its fibers just like a wick, giving you a homemade candle that can burn for hours. Twist the Oreos apart and scrape the cream into a bowl. Then crush the cookies into tiny crumbs with a rolling pin. Mix in a splash of milk, and after it turns into a soft dough, you can roll it out into a thin sheet. Next, water down the cream with milk and smooth it over the dough. Roll it into a log and wrap it with plastic wrap to keep it moist. After chilling it in the fridge, you can slice it into small rounds to get Oreo sushi. He flew all the way across the world and proposed to her, but even though she loved him, her family disapproved. So she sent him home, heartbroken. He never forgot her, and years later, he started dressing as a bronze statue, sitting on park benches. Tourists would pose for photos, but if they touched him, he would suddenly spring to life, making them laugh. Videos of his trick soon went viral, and the woman he had proposed to saw it. She got in touch and eventually admitted that she had always loved him. And after he flew back to her country, they were finally married, 23 years after he proposed. The stray puppy stumbled into the icy puddle, which froze around its paws, trapping him in place. And by the time he was found, all 4 feet had to be amputated. Now, at first, he could get around on his stumps, but as he grew bigger, he struggled to hold his own weight. His new owner raised enough money for 2 prosthetic feet, but the vet saw his other stumps and donated 2 more, allowing the puppy to run and play as the first dog with 4 bionic limbs. If a cruise ship was headed for an iceberg, could it sink just like the Titanic? Well, the Titanic's hull was only connected at certain points, which is why the iceberg ripped right through it. Modern ships are welded along every seam, making them much stronger. Now, if it somehow still broke, the cruise ship could sink. But the Titanic didn't have a good way to call for help, and it didn't have enough lifeboats for everyone on board, which is why so many died. Modern ships have satellite phones to call for help and enough lifeboats to help everyone get out alive.
As you write, tiny flakes of graphite rub off the pencil and onto the paper, sitting between the rough paper fibers.
Now, when you rub an eraser against the mark, the soft rubber bends into the tiny grooves of the paper. And since it's stickier than the paper, the graphite from the pencil clings to the eraser instead. As you keep rubbing, it slowly crumbles away, carrying the trapped graphite with it. But if you don't have an eraser, you can just use a piece of bread, which essentially does the same thing. If you line up a row of bricks on a flat surface and space them exactly 1 brick length apart, as they fall on top of each other, each brick will knock the next one over. But the last one doesn't have anything in front of it, which lets it slide forward just enough to make the brick in front of it fall flat. And as this one slips forward, it lets the next one fall, starting a backwards chain reaction until all the bricks have fallen in a perfectly straight line.
He opened the smoker and found a human leg inside.
Years earlier, a man was injured in a plane crash, and after his leg was amputated, the doctor let him keep it as a memento. He preserved it with a special chemical and stored it in the smoker. But he eventually became homeless, and the smoker was sold with the leg still hidden inside. After finding it, the new owner gave it to police. But when the story went viral, the new owner tried to get the leg back for some reason. The court refused and ordered the leg to be given back to the man who lost it. You would place the liner inside the toilet before pooping into it. And when you flush, the liner and waste will drop into a sealed chamber below, where it's burned at around 1,000 degrees to kill all bacteria. As it heats up, it creates smoke and gas, which passes through a filter and comes out without a smell. The process also makes ash, which gets stored in a container. And when there's enough, you can even spread it in your garden to help your plants grow, turning your poop into food. Fold the long ends of the towel about this much and roll each short end to the center. Flip it over and fold it in half. Take a hand towel and fold it 3/4 down, then tuck the corners in, leaving a small gap. Turn it face down and roll the bottom up. Then bend it in half to create the head. Wrap a rubber band around the base and place the head inside the large towel. Fold the towel over it and stand it upright to complete your bear towel. She crashed into a truck and her arm had to be amputated. Now, she was a talented violinist, and now that she couldn't play anymore, she became deeply depressed. But after seeing other people use prosthetics to play sports, she got inspired by their determination. She had a special prosthetic arm made. With a bow attachment she could control with her shoulder. After years of practice, she could finally play the violin again. And eventually, she even performed at the Paralympics. Crack an egg into the Greek yogurt and add honey and vanilla for sweetness. Stir in some melted butter and whisk until it's completely smooth. Spoon everything into an icing bag and pipe long lines onto parchment paper using scissors to snip the ends. Then drop them into hot oil and take them out once they turn golden brown. Finally, toss them in sugar and drizzle frosting on top to get a batch of crispy yogurt fries. When a crow dies, others gather around, staring at the dead bird and calling others to join in. Now, since the crows seemed to be sad, people believed this was a funeral. But if the dead crow is held by a human, the birds get more aggressive, dive-bombing the person and calling out warnings to their friends. They even remember the human's face, telling the other crows, and harassing that person for years. Meaning what looked like a funeral was really an investigation. They're figuring out what caused the death so they can avoid the same fate. If you built a crane with a 400,000-mile arm and you attached a 6-mile wide cable to the moon, could you turn the moon into a giant wrecking ball? Well, the moon is already orbiting around Earth at over 2,000 miles per hour. So once you attach the cable, it would keep moving, and that amount of force would rip the crane from the Earth while dragging the cable around the planet as it moved. And even if you somehow slowed it down, it would just lose its orbit and crash straight into Earth. Police answered the 911 call, but heard nothing. So they sent officers to check the apartment. When they walked in, they saw a cat lying right next to the phone. And in the next room, his owner was lying on the floor. You see, he had fallen out of his wheelchair and couldn't get up. But he claimed that he had tried to teach his cat to dial 911 in an emergency. And the call came from inside the apartment with no one else inside. Place the straw between 2 full cups, but ensure that it's already filled with liquid. Now, a second straw sits with one end in a full cup and the other in an empty cup. Now, just like this, nothing happens. But if you fill the second straw with liquid from the full cup and seal both ends with your fingers, this traps the liquid inside. So, when you put it between the cups and let go, the liquid suddenly flows out of the straw and into the empty cup. The pressure difference between the 2 cups drives liquid up the straw, while gravity keeps pulling it through. The first straw does the same, pulling liquid from the first cup into the second, until the levels in all 3 cups are perfectly matched. Hold up a page with a dot and a cross, and then close one eye. Now keep staring at the cross as you slowly move the page closer. At a certain point, the dot will completely disappear. And this happens because that spot on your eye is where the nerve connects to your retina, meaning there aren't any cells there to detect light. Now, if you move the page closer or farther, the dot will reappear, and it looks bigger or smaller. But the blind spot is always there in your vision. You just don't notice it because your brain fills in the missing part automatically. As he began to play, hundreds of rats were drawn to the sound. They followed him through the streets of the town until he reached the river, where the rats walked into the water and drowned. Now, the townspeople were relieved that the rats were removed. But when the piper asked for the money that he had been promised, they refused to pay. So he waited until the adults went to church, then he played another song on his pipe. And this time, the children of the town came out of their houses and followed the sound. The piper led them toward a mountain, leaving them in the wilderness, and their parents never saw them again. If you were thrown into a bag of popcorn, the heat would slowly build, and the kernels would begin to release hot steam, roasting you alive. And if you somehow managed to survive that, the kernels would start popping. Each one would send a shockwave as the unpopped kernels around you become grenades. The butter on the floor makes it impossible to keep your balance, and the burning oil sticks to your skin, scalding you and frying your body. They had short legs tucked close to their small bodies, allowing them to squeeze into badger holes. And they had powerful front paws, which made it easier to dig. Their rib cages were long and deep, which protected their organs from sharp roots and stones. And for a small dog, their teeth were surprisingly big, which meant when they found a badger, they could bite down hard and hold it. The speeding car smashed right into the tree, breaking his neck and back and putting him into a coma, as well as injuring his pregnant girlfriend. But 3 months later, he woke up, and he told police his girlfriend had been mad that day. As she drove, she started yelling at him, getting angrier and angrier, until she finally snapped and swerved into the tree on purpose. Now, the woman was arrested, but the man got sick in the hospital and tragically died before ever meeting his baby.
আপনি এখানে শুয়ে আছেন কেন? Chai. Good, very good. এনে তো চা। তোকে এরকম উদ্ভ্রান্তের মতো লাগছে কেন? জি।
সুন্দর।
এই যায়।
থ্যাংক ইউ।
আমাদের শহর কেমন লাগছে?
এখনো বুঝে উঠতে পারিনি।
আমি যেন সেই কাজ করি ভালো মনে।
আমি শুভ, এখানে নতুন এসেছি।
টুম্পা তোর সাথে কথা বলবে।
কেন? আমি বিরক্ত করলে তোমার সমস্যা না? আর 5 জন এসে বিরক্ত করে তাতে
জাফর আমার এক্স হাজবেন্ড।
শেষ পর্যন্ত তোমার বুদ্ধি হলো। যাক, এটা ভালো।
না না
আসতে বলুন না, সেটা আমার একটু জরুরি কথা আছে।
বাবা
ভাই, আমি তো এলাকা ছাড়ার আগে
তুমি একটা গিরাট টুকরা ছেলে, যেই ছেলে তানিয়া আমার পিস্তলটা নিয়ে আয় তো।
টাকা কি দুধটা রাইখে গেলাম।
মাত্র সে ফেসবুকে স্ট্যাটাস দিয়েছে সে একটি অনাথ বাচ্চাকে
কত স্যাক্রিফাইস করছি, এলাকার বড় ভাই থেকে রিক্সা চালক হয়ে গেলাম, আর সেটাই করবো। যে গরম না, আর এই বড় ভাই তোর মায়ের চিকিৎসার দায়িত্ব নিছে। সেলিম ভাই ভালোবাসার লেগে জেল খাটছিল।
ভাই আপনি যত কথাই, এই বাড়িতে ওই বদমাইশটার কথা একবারও ভুলে উচ্চারণ করবা না।
ভাই মিনিমাম আপনি 17 লাইনের একটা কবিতা লেখেন। 17 লাইনের কবিতা
কিন্তু ছাপাই না, সব মাথার ভিতরে থাকে। যখন পড়তে ইচ্ছা করে মাথা, আমি জানো ওরে বাপ করে দেব। আর আমি কি কমো জানো? তবু তানিয়া ভালো কেমনে বেটা, কস না কেন, ক বেটা।
এটা পড়ে আপনার প্রেমে পুরো রূপ করে পড়ে যাবো।
আর তোর
আপনি পারবেন ভাই, আপনি পারবেন।
ও 700 লাইন লিখবো, আর বাদ বাকি 300 লাইন আমি লেখা বললাম।
একটু নামিয়ে দাও, মানে ও ছাড়া পাক না পাক তাতে আমাদের কি?
পাচ্ছিল এই তো
আমি
সারাইদের ফসল ভাই,
সারাইদের ফসল না, সারাইদের ফসল, রিমোট না।
তার মানে আপনি কবি না?
জি না, বড় ভাই।
জান
মাইশা, এখন তুমি আমার বাড়ি থেকে বেরিয়ে যাও, যাও বলছি।
বেটা আইবো না, জুয়েল কথা কথা। আরে জুলি গেছে। আরে হ হাসপাতালের কাজ শেষ কইরা সারা এলাকা। জুলি তুমি বুঝতাছো না, একটাই দাবি থাকবো, যে এক দফা এক দাবি। আমি
কষ্ট আমার বুকটা পাইতে গেছে, আমি অনেক কষ্ট পাইছি ভাই।
কষ্ট কোনো ব্যাপার না।
এই রিকশা,
এই ঘটনা ইতিহাস হয়ে থাকবো যে সেলিম ভাই ভালো। আরে জুলি গেছে বাইরে মনে কর পিক করতে, বুঝছো? মিনিমাম 1700 লাইন কবিতা লাগবো। তুই 700 লিখবি। মানুষ তো মর্ডার, যে কোনো সময় মারা যেতে পারে, মারা গেলেই বাঁচি।
আমার কথার বাইরে কোনো কিছু করবি না, আর ও যদি তোকে পড়ানোর চেষ্টা করে তুই কোনোভাবে কোন হারামজাদা আমার মায়ের ডিস্টার্ব করে।
হ্যালো, আপনি শুধু শুধু রাগ করছেন। কই
আপনার মেয়ে যাবে না স্যার?
না, আমার মেয়ে যাবে না, আমি একা যাব। এই সেলিম, তুমি কই যাও?